sauce is the key, we whipping it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. Hey, hey, hey.
All right, Andrew, it's good to be here with you. We're doing our first, we've done so many other things together. Now we're doing our first recording together.
We're constantly evolving, my friend.
Well, and listen, I think, for those of you who are tuning in to listen to this, Andrew and I, if you don't know us, shame on you. The reality is here in Phoenix, Andrew is probably the most connected guy in Phoenix. I jokingly tell this story that one time I introduced him to somebody that he didn't already know, and you could just see how flustered he was. Like, how is it possible that I don't know somebody that's in business here in Phoenix? So Andrew's pretty well connected, and I think a lot of that is just sort of the lifestyle and the way that you sort of live your business and personal life. Me, on the other hand, I think we always have worked really well together because we're really yin and yang when it comes to networking and connecting with people and cocktail parties and that sort of whole thing. But we just figured we wanted to start this little conversation to see what the opportunities were and maybe, help sort of highlight some of the things that are happening here in the Phoenix and Arizona area and sort of share with you our vision for how we sort of see. I don't even like to use the word networking. It's more like mixing how we sort of see it differently. So Andrew, thanks for joining me.
We met years ago. You were on the board of, I think, the Phoenix Green Chamber of Commerce.
That's right. Yep.
And they engaged my company to help better promote. And being that I had a strong environmental science background, I was a chief science officer, environmental scientist, university adjunct professor, and then I evolved. There were many steps in between, but I had owned this sales and marketing company, and we got to know each other, and then we drifted apart, and then we got back together again. And I don't know who. I think it was it you, Derrick, that said, we should do a gathering, because I know that
Okay, so I was thinking about this the other day. I think you reached out to me. It was December of 2018. And I think you reached out to me and you said, hey, look, I don't know if you'd done a tour of Fat Scooters or what it was, but because I was the president of Fat Scooters at the time. And there was this conversation about having like this holiday get together. You were like, hey, what if we just did like a holiday get together? And I'm like, well, you can use the bar at my office. And then the next thing you know, that sort of grew into its own thing. Yeah, I have to go back through the emails and look.
Well, first of all, for those who didn't ever go to a Secret Sauce Society gathering at Fat Scooters, man, you missed out. It was the bar area. When you pull in to where the facility was, you're like, where the hell am I? There's a party here. And then
it's
when
like
you
an industrial center,
the disco ball that says welcome Secret Sauce and the big black curtains and the big giant bar. It was like, wow. And it started from, I think our first event was, 25 people, 30 people. And then it just quickly took off, and our original intention, I think, as it started evolving was Derrick obviously wanted to meet movers and shakers in the community, not only to find synergistic relationships for what he was doing with Fat Scooters, and also some consulting work that he had been doing, and the same for me. And it had just evolved. And one of the things that Derrick gave me the facility, which was amazing. And so he was relying mostly in the beginning on me to just bring people. And bring good people, right? Bring people that were not just showing up with business cards. And am I allowed to speak freely on this podcast?
Yes, go ahead, speak freely, for sure.
Humping somebody's leg for business, and that happens at like almost every networking event where there's just all these people humping people's legs. And the one thing Derrick and I were like adamant about, this was the one thing we totally agreed, there will be none of that. None of that.
Yeah, I remember I think it was the second or third one, we actually, like, as a joke said, if you get caught giving out a business card, we're we're going to curb stomp your ass and throw you out on the street. Like it was a joke, but everybody understood what we were saying. And I do think, and we've talked about this a lot, and I'm looking back, it looks like the first email string in my personal email is like March 2019, where we're like, should we start charging for this? Like, what should we do? Like, we were having this whole sort of conversation, like, now that this thing has grown, because I think at that point, I should send this to you because it might even give us some great sort of insights into where we are today. But, at this point, you and I we were just covering the booze, and we were just sort of like, let's sort of, have some friends around. And then it started getting bigger. And I think, if I remember correctly, this was March. I think April was like 180 people showed up.
Well, it
was out of control.
A thing. And we were trying to do our best not to let it get hand. At least I was really really trying to keep it to quality than quantity. Yeah. Right. And that
you don't want the leg humpers. To your point, you don't, this is the big turnoff, I think, with executives in particular. If you go to a chamber mixer, and I'm not knocking chamber mixers, but you get a lot of people that are sub $1 million in revenue. And anybody who's been in business very long knows that there's different stages of a company. And, there's sort of the primordial soup of the idea, and we're trying to raise funds. There's I've got established, and I've got one or two people, and maybe I own a dry cleaner, or I own a car wash, or whatever that might be. And then you start to sort of work up through the tiers, and you get to that point, even when you look at some of the CEO breakfasts and roundtables that you and I go and speak at. And, you look at those groups, and they are they're very segmented, and they're not segmented because somebody's better than somebody else is. It's that the challenges and the considerations and the things that you have to be thinking about at 50 million are totally different than at 5 million, and completely different than 100 million. They just are very radically different things. And I don't, when I go to something like that and I'm sharing a cocktail with somebody, I don't want to be pitched. I'm there. I'm selfishly there. And this is where you and I diverge a little bit, I think. I see particularly executives that go to events like Secret Sauce from a very selfish perspective. And it is not that they are looking for anything other than just more. It's really lonely as a CEO of a bigger company, and that's just sort of their social network of being able to share with other people that have like experiences and perspectives and on business.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I think what we created, whether intentionally, I think it was intentional, but I don't know how pinpoint our focus was. Is that I think what really people get out of it the most is that they're meeting other interesting people of similar level, right?
Yes.
Of similar. Now, you're right. The decisions at $100 million company are totally different than the decisions of a $10 million company. Yes. But the truth is, we were putting people in the room that were at, really all different levels. Yeah. As well as allied professionals like bankers and executive consultants, and some maybe the head of business development for a nice company. But yes, I think it was that people were coming to meet other pretty interesting, almost on level people. Right.
Yeah, and I would say even, and you and I were really selective in the sense that even if somebody was at $1 million or $500,000, but they had a history or they were an up and comer, we would bring them into that fold too, because these are people that were on trajectory, or I think as you used to call it, gas, right? It's like these are people that give a shit, and they're growing their business, they're actively sort of, but they've already got the machine sort of down pat on business acquisition, at least in a lot of perspectives. Like they've proven that there's a need and a demand for their product in the market. They've moved beyond that, I'm not sure if this is going to make it kind of thing. And they've moved into that, how do I run and operate and grow and, maximize and make it more efficient and those kind of things. I think it was just a graduation. And I look at other different events that have been, and COVID, we'll talk about COVID here in a minute. COVID was a big deal. I mean, there were a couple other different events that I had hosted at Fat Scooters that were like really early entrepreneurs, you know, and it was a lot of rah talk and a lot of Tony Robbins, and no offense to Tony Robbins, he stole my voice. Anybody that notices, we have the same intonations and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not a follower of Tony Robbins, and I understand there are people that are, and I understand why. It's those people that are, you know, they're in the hustle state of the game still. And I think what we were able to do is bring together people that had achieved some level of success, that really were there more from a social and a network, not a networking perspective, right? Well, they were trying to build a network. They weren't there for networking. They weren't trying to expand. They were trying to find that one or two people that they really click or connect with.
There's a desire for wisdom. And I think when you're going to a gathering of other people who are evolving as well at a certain level, they too are seeking wisdom, right? And I think that's why, because the one thing that we have consistently, the feedback we have gotten through the years, Derrick, is it's a totally different vibe. I don't know what the hell you've done here. You know, and it's not just necessarily the status of the people in the room. I was trying to put my thumb on it, trying to figure out, oh, well, maybe it's just gas. Give a shit, you know, because I'm very drawn to people like you, Derrick, even though we may have our differences. Who doesn't have differences? That I grew up in a home that taught me to celebrate differences, right? But you know, what we have in common is far more than our differences. But I do think that, you know, I thought it was give a shit that I was inviting people that I was drawn to, people that just cared more than most, right? And it was really that, you know, they used, because they cared so much, they had a greater commitment to what they were doing. They used their smarts maybe to help them achieve more in life, but the foundation was gas. But I don't know if that's what it is, but I do know that a lot of what people seek in there, because I talk to them after they come and they say, yeah, it's totally different. And maybe it is that wisdom sharing thing, because when I pop in and out of the conversations at our events, like, cause I'm like,
yeah, right. Well, likewise, right. We're hosting, right? Yeah,
I'm helicoptering in, and almost every.
You know, it's funny. You said master of ceremony, but I first heard master of pheromones, and I was like, "What the fuck is it? What is this thing?" Like,
no. So master of ceremonies.
The master of pheromones. I don't know.
Out of all these conversations,
right?
And I've got to tell you, virtually none of them, they're talking about business.
Right. That's such a good. Yeah.
They're not.
You know, I want to tell a quick story here, because those of you who know me, you know, I do a lot of consulting work, and years ago, and I need to get back into it more. I did a lot of work with this group, Lego Serious Play, and Lego Serious Play was created by the Lego Corporation to help people facilitate decision-making and problem solving using the Lego pieces, just like you would play with your kids. But they have some very exclusive sets that are really relative to business. And I got an opportunity to go to the board of a very large healthcare organization and to perform an exercise for them using Legos. And what we did is we did something for this group. We call it Superhero Kryptonite. And we essentially bring them all into a room. And these are board members who know each other on a professional level. And we asked them, we said, before we get started, we're going to have you each introduce yourselves. Now, I've been around doctors enough in my life to know that when a doctor or anybody that has that higher level of PhD education, the way that they introduce themselves is based upon their research, their, where they work and what university they went to. They're very, very big on this. It's like, hi, I'm Derrick Mains. I went to Harvard. I did this. I did this. I did this. I'm currently involved. That's just the way that they introduce themselves. But instead of doing that, instead of letting them do it verbally, we dumped a whole box of Legos on the table. And we said, we'd like you to build an avatar of self. And then you're going to stand up, hold up your avatar, and introduce yourself as your avatar.
I've done that with you. I remember.
You have, yeah. And this one was so mind-boggling because when the doctors got up to talk, not a single one of them talked about what they did for a living. Like they talked about their lives, they talked about their dogs,
Who
they talked about
are rather than what they do. Right?
Exactly. And it was really fascinating. And then we asked each one of them to go around holding up their avatar again, explaining what the superpowers of that avatar was. What do they think their superpowers were, right? I'm really good at managing bureaucracy. I'm really great at super detail oriented. Like we had them do that. And then we had them get up a third time and we said, now hold up your avatar and tell us what its kryptonite is. And we did this exercise. It was absolutely mind-blowing. And even the organizer told me afterwards, he's like, I learned more in that session about the people in that room than I had ever known before. And what we found was even some people that were opposing opinions on the board found common ground. One, for instance, found that when he got up and held up his avatar, he said, I have a son that has severe autism. One of his nemesises on the board also stood up and said, I have a son with severe autism. Well, all of a sudden, guess what happened during the break, right? They're out in the hallway chatting and connecting with each other.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish.
No, just in closing on that, the fascinating thing was we finished this exercise and the organizer grabs me and says, I think we should take a break. This was really heavy. And I feel like everybody just needs a break. And I showed my watch to him and only 15 minutes had gone by. And he was like, what in the world? It's like, I feel like we went through this psychological experiment and we've all been completely, turned to mush and brought back as human beings. And it was only 15 minutes. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, right? Making those really deeper connections. I have used Secret Sauce now for the last year or so. I get a ton of requests for meetings every single day. I get requests for meetings. Now, interestingly, I don't do coffee meetings at all anymore. And I do selective lunch meetings, usually 1 or 2 a month. And that is only with super high caliber people that maybe we want to do business together. Now, that might sound very sort of prejudicial, but for much of my career, I was an entrepreneur in residence, was mentoring companies. I was doing all of these kind of things. And eventually I reached a point where I said, I'm not getting any value at all out of that anymore. Even me helping people, I wasn't getting even the psychological value, right? All I felt like I was being was drained. So for me, I use Secret Sauce in a reverse way that I think Andrew and many other people do. And that is when I get requests from people that are like, hey, look, I'd love to pick your brain. I send them to the Secret Sauce website and I say, great, buy a ticket and I'll see you the first Wednesday or third Wednesday of next month. Now, that's a pretty good barrier, right? Because if they're really serious and they really do have an opportunity and they really do want to pick my brain, they can buy a ticket and they can do it. If they're just trying to get something for nothing and there's nothing in it for me, I'm just a little bit more of a selfish capitalistic pig than Andrew is.
So let me comment on that. So yeah. Derrick, I'm going to speak for Derrick, so you have to shut up now.
Okay, all right. I'll turn my mic off.
Not a selfish cat. He make the pig part is really not accurate because Derrick does give a shit about people. I think what Derrick is speaking to, audience, if you're listening, is he values his time more than most humans value their time. And he has learned how to say no and to just about everything. Take care of number one. Now, that doesn't mean he's a pig, so I'm sorry. I am correcting you for calling you that because I think it's an easy way to say, well, no, I'm just a capitalist. That's not really it. I know you. Our audience may not know you at the way I know you. And while, yes, you want to make money and money is important and you've made it a priority and you've been successful in figuring out how to do that, but it's not because of who you are, a capitalist pig. I think it's because if you really think about it, you've learned how to say no and value your time. And that's translated into more money. And you've seen how those decisions that people don't make, which I fall prey to, that you're like, no, we can meet at my event. No, we can meet at my event, right? Is you know, I really do believe that it sounds very nuanced, but that is really who you are, because I know how generous you are.
Mhm.
I know, not just to me and other people, but charity. I
Mhm.
know that you want to make a difference for people. I mean, I know who you are. So that's not, I don't like when you frame yourself that way.
So this is where you're going to get, at those of you who are tuning in and listening to this is where Andrew and I, this is like this, we love each other, but this is this one point of contention we always have, because he always tries to convince me that I'm this good guy, and I am always like, it's not what you think, right? and I will tell you, we were at a charity event here recently, and I will admit, like you already said, I try to be generous. I gave it the highest level, and what did I say to you afterwards? They should have
given more if they asked for more.
If they would have asked for more, I would have given a lot more.
Tell me. That doesn't tell me you're a capitalist pig.
It does. It says that when there's a room full of 200 people and they put out the big number that nobody's going to raise their hand for, that I raise my hand for it. And why do I do that? Do I do it because I'm a generous person, or do I do it because I want to be in the spotlight?
Look.
See, I got you, Andrew.
No, you don't have me. Do you really think you did it because you wanted to be in the spotlight? In a room of people where may not financially have been at your level?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I do. But I'm just saying that to torment you. So
well, the one thing you're going to get on this show, everybody, is honesty.
Yeah, so, that's right. I mean, because we do. I mean, that is the great thing. I think so many people are aligned. We're not, right? Yeah.
Everybody has ego. You have ego. I have ego, right? But I don't know. Maybe I see things in you you don't see in yourself, sir.
And that's okay. I mean, I do think that, as you know, I have a lot of opinions on a lot of things, and some of those opinions are relatively extreme in some cases. And some things, Lars Thording, who I think Lars, Andrew, good friend of mine, he's like, look, Derrick, you're the only person I've ever met that has no dogma whatsoever. He's like, I can ask your opinion on something today, and you can give a really great oration on the facts and what that means and why you believe what you believe. And then a week later, you'll text me and say, I don't believe any of that shit anymore. Like I completely convinced myself of something else. And he's like, that's so unique. He's like, because so many people get so ingrained in their opinion.
Listen,
and my opinion is only good for today.
Listen.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, but that's where we are totally aligned, because
one
of the things that I've always
well, you're a scientist. Of course you're going to align on that, right?
Things that I've always felt in any company that I've ever built, in any business I've ever consulted to, is, the Buddha said all suffering comes from attachment, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it, that's really true. But the one thing that I've always made sure in everything I've tried to do is never be attached to being right, only to finding it, right? So, and that was something I live my life by. I try to, is that I'll be attached to something. I'll have extreme opinions, just like you, Derrick, right? And then the next week, I read something else that blew my fucking mind.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know if I was right.
Yeah.
And so I'm all about, fight for what you believe is right, but you can never be completely attached to it. You have to be attached to always finding it. And I think that's who you are, and that's who I am.
Yeah, and I think I just wrote down this word in my sort of list of things I'm working on, this sort of idea of defensible positions. It's like people will ask me, why are you so rigid on this opinion? And I said, well, it's just a defensible position. This is just the position that I'm negotiating and thinking through right now, and that my mind is fixated on. But because a position is defensible in a military perspective, doesn't mean that you don't retreat or advance. You're just defending that position right now because that is the best attainable solution on the board. But as conditions change, you have to be able, you can't dig in too deeply. You got to get just deep enough that you
trench warfare, and we know what that was like.
Absolutely. And you get entrenched in that idea and that feeling and that belief. Right. And listen, I mean, we can look at like the American political system and we see that, right? What we've seen is we've dug in so heavily into these positions. And the funny thing about so many of the positions is they're relatively new. If you look at Ronald Reagan, I mean, Ronald Reagan is probably way more of a liberal than Biden is, But yet we still, Republicans still sort of look at Ronald Reagan as this sort of, but the assault weapons ban. I mean, so many things about our society came from that time. Or George H.W. Bush and emissions trading, which is the carbon credit system. Now, it's interesting how that sort of works, right? We tend to
we
get entrenched.
Are living with labels, and I mean, this is a great time to go back to Lao Tzu.
Yeah,
Lao Tzu. If anybody has ever studied the Tao, which I have, and Dr. Mains' last book was called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, The Living Wisdom of the Tao. And it's really mind expanding. And, that's why I think we should bring him back into the conversation, because judgment, one of the things you learn from Lao Tzu and the Tao is judgment usually more times than not does not serve. It doesn't serve you or them. That we should actually practice more often in the bell curve that you speak of, do what Paul McCartney said to do and let it be, rather than take an immediate position and judgment on it. Because when you let it be, you allow to then see it for what it is, rather than attach to something based on your worldview and then shape everything else from that based on your worldview. Because if you can observe, just like Eckhart Tolle said, you are not your thoughts, right? Your thoughts, you can actually observe your thoughts. The fact that you can observe your thoughts means that you are not them, right? You can allow yourself to become them, right? Which is what we do. We become our thoughts rather than act as a participant in those thoughts.
Yeah, that's such this is why I said we should just turn the recording on, because now we're getting into some really, like, now I'm looking at the clock and I'm like 33 minutes. I'm like, I have a whole nother hour now.
So
because
why don't we pause that? Because you and I can go philosophically back and forth. And the one thing that I love about philosophy is that, I'm like you. I'll dig in, but then I'm willing to be knocked off my block, Yeah.
No,
I
love this feeling. I call it crunched, where I get crunched, where it's like everything about my opinion. It's like a Pringles potato chip, right? It just gets smashed into a million pieces. I love those things. I've actually been writing a lot on that sort of concept here lately, of where you have these radical perception shifts, all based upon sort of a point. And I actually seek these things out. I love watching videos, particularly religious debate videos, where somebody makes a real zinger of a point, and the other person, you can see something's happening in their mind, right? They pause, and this whole worldview, it's almost like somebody picks them up and moves them and places them in a different position. And you can just see how everything changes, like their facial expressions. I just watched a debate last night where somebody did this, where they turned a question around on the person, and you could see the guy actually said, I think I need to stop at this point. Like, he's like, he was afraid to go any farther, which is a great place to be.
I think because of who you are and who I am, we so readily exercise our own internal conversation towards such deeper introspection and thinking that I don't think many people ordinarily do. And I think that ultimately is the respect that we have for one another, is that while we may have some differences on things, I think there's a lot of respect back and forth because of our ability to communicate difficult ideas and concepts together in a healthy way I always listen to what you have to say.
Likewise.
And then sometimes I'll say, you really think so, Derrick? And you're like, oh yeah. And then you're right. A week later, I'm like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, totally. it is really, I think Lars is this one guy, that he always introduces me that way. He's like, this is the first guy I've ever met that has no dogma whatsoever. Like, he might be pro-life this week and pro-choice next week and pro something else the week after. You just don't know. And he can always defend the position.
Right.
He can always defend that position.
Never be a politician. Everybody, don't ever vote for Derrick because
I would be terrible.
He's a waffler. And by the way,
I am flip-flopper.
I'm a huge I tell people all the time, because I was, in New York, I was kind of also got in the inner circle of politics in New York, and people always ask me to run, and I'm like, no. I'll help somebody, but I can't run because I change my idea and view on things all the time. I'm a waffler. You can't make me pick a side to sometimes these issues, right? And that makes me respect people that will pick a side and will defend them, but that's not me.
I'm so glad that you said this, because it's something else that I've been working on is this. I call these people shoe sharers, right? We've all talked about walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, but just standing in somebody else's shoes and seeing the situation from their position is a really, really powerful thing to do. And I think most people can't shoe share. They don't know how to do it. They can't compartmentalize their belief from someone else's argument. And it's the one thing that I've always really sought out, and I've always seek out people that do that, where they can just as easily argue and defend the counter position, as they can their own position. But there have some reason why they have taken this position and the other person has taken that position. And I think it's really interesting. And it requires, I think, you to have lived in different cultures, to live in different places, to have, New York is a great town, but New York is a very, very much like Pennsylvania. I don't think that area of the country understands the racist sort of undertones of how their neighborhoods are set up and so many different things. And I don't mean that in a racial perspective of like a negative, but I look at the town I grew up in. There are streets that are only Italian people live on. There are streets that only Slovaks and only Russians live on. And if somebody would date somebody from another street, or even think about moving to a house on that other street, people would be like, what, are you crazy? That's an Italian street. You can't live on there. You don't have enough Italian blood. And it's a joke, but you can see it. You still can see it to this day when you walk past the mailboxes and look at everybody's last name. If it ends in ski, they're all on one street, right? It's very, very sort of segmented like that. And I do think I think that's what I love about Arizona. Arizona is a melting pot. Like, the United States at one point was a melting pot, but those melting pots have shrunk. And now you have to have a state where there's high levels of immigration. And I'm not talking about illegal immigration. I'm talking about immigration of American citizens even moving into that place. Because, as you know, Andrew, is anybody actually from Arizona? There's only a few. For the most part, we're all transplants here.
Somebody, I actually pinched them just to say, oh my God.
Yeah, there's a real one. Like, I'm going to be 20 years here in 4 months, 5 months. And I'm like, now at that point, I'm just a native. Like, I'm 20 years is one of the longest.
Yeah, I'm here 16, So.
Yeah. So, there's not many people that have been here that long. And I think that gives you a very interesting perspective on the world, specifically because of that.
And it still remains an adjustment for me because, there's political ideology, like, me being a Jew from New York. Right? In New York City. I think there's more Jews in New York than there is in Israel.
There is. There's more Jews than there is in Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
And everywhere I go, there's other people like me that think like me, that culturally act like me. And when you leave a place like that and come here, where it is the melting pot, where there's not a lot of Jewish people, and there's a lot of divided political ideology and religion and immigration and all these things that are all happening now here in Arizona. And now Arizona is going to be the chip making capital of the world. We just landed another Taiwanese manufacturer.
Electric vehicle manufacturing is
Right.
now heavily here.
I mean, we just got to figure out our water issues, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. But
did you hear that? My Alexa went off. We said something that has caused Alexa to keep searching high-tech vehicle manufacturing in the background. My apologies.
It has been an adjustment for me. And thank God I was raised in a home to learn to celebrate the differences of people. And what that enabled me to do, Derrick, was to more listen, not to respond, but listen to understand. And I think that's your point that you were trying to make earlier, is you and I are a little different that way. When you said sharing shoes, I think you called it.
I call it shoe sharers. Yep.
Right. And that's when you're actually 100% focused on listening to understand and not to respond at all. And it's very difficult as a human being to let go of your worldview and how you see the world, and to accept that somebody else's might be a good one too, right? And that's really hard to do because we only see good and bad and evil. Lao Tzu, we only see up and down, in and out. And those things, as Lao Tzu would say, they cannot exist without the other. Hot could never exist without cold. There would be no hot.
And I'm going to tell you as an audience a fact right now. I'm hoping that Andrew doesn't even know about this. With his environmental background, he might. But this fact is so mind-blowing that the scientific community is not getting any traction among the general population. And that's the concept of dark fish. Have you heard of this, the dark fish?
I have. Why don't you tell the audience?
Yeah. So dark fish is really interesting. We know there's dark matter out there. We know that most of the universe comprises of dark matter. When we started bringing in sonar into boats and they started crossing the ocean, one of the things that was always noted by ship captains was that the bottom of the deepest parts of the ocean floor, actually the distance to the bottom changed based upon the time of day. Meaning that, let's say a trench was 2,000 feet deep right now. If we go over that at night, it might only be 1,500 feet deep. And there was all sorts of beliefs that there was maybe the sonar was bouncing off things, or maybe it had to do with magnetism or something in the atmosphere. And for, 60, 70 years, nobody's really ever been sure, until a group of scientists decided to go out into the deepest parts of the ocean and drop very, very deep water nets into these areas. And they discovered something fascinating. And that is that 95% of the biomass of the oceans, 95% of the fish in the oceans were completely and totally undetectable to us until the last 36 months. We had no idea that the majority of living organisms on this planet live at the bottom, deepest parts of the ocean, and they live in complete darkness, and they don't go up to areas where there's light because they're not evolved to do that, number one, and then they would become easy prey. So instead, these trillions of beings every night, lift themselves up, swim up to a higher level to eat, and then they drop back down during the day. And they've proven this beyond a shadow of a doubt now. But even the scientific community is like, that just can't be possible. It can't be possible that 95% of the biomass on this planet we didn't even realize existed until the last couple of years, which means a lot of things. The health of our oceans is different than we thought. The amount of fish that we thought that we were taking all these fish out of the ocean and that was causing a problem. Well, we're only really taking a fraction of a fraction. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't conserve, but it's just this whole entire different mindset that something was this undetectable to us. So what else is undetectable to us?
Right. And that, is something that, if you were to ask people of everything there is to be known, that only maybe God or the universe, some divine source, how much of if you took a slice of the pie, how much would your slice of the pie be? And most people say, well, it'd just be like a line, right? I'm like, okay, well, how much would you say of that is you don't know? Like, you don't know quantum physics. You don't know all these things that other people know, right? That's what you you know you don't know? How much of the slice of the pie of everything there is to be known would be that? And some people struggle with it, but those that are following along usually say, well, it would just be like a line also, because it's still limited to what is known.
Yeah.
First, right. And I said, well, then what's the rest is then what you don't know about what you don't know. And that makes up most of what's known is what you don't know.
What you don't know, yeah.
And that could be, now here's where perception comes in. That could be possibility. That could be a whole bunch of things of how we choose to judge most of what, right? So here we are fighting wars, killing people, arguing, disagreeing on this thin line, this incredibly thin line of the pie, right? When really everything is what we mostly don't know about what we don't know until we have earth-shattering discoveries that change our very understanding of how we see ourselves in the world. And this happens at, every multiple generational time period, right? And it'll happen again and again and again.
But I also think that things like ChatGPT this last week, with what's going on with ChatGPT, if you haven't spent any time with ChatGPT yet, you need to do it, because people have made multi-million-dollar businesses over the weekend and are generating millions of dollars in revenue, taking the free API from ChatGPT and turning it into products. I mean, it's
just asking a question, man.
Right. I mean, but then on top of that, you have all these AIs that are great artists. So creativity, I also think the definition of creativity is changing, where before it was the application of creative thinking to a medium where you were painting or you were doing something with it. Creativity today is much more ethereal. It is much more about creative problem solving, creative thinking. It's about perspective. It's about shoe sharing. The true artists of business in the next century are going to be these people that have trained themselves to think in very, very unique ways and are able to almost like De Bono's 6 thinking hats, take the hat off, lay it on the table, pick up the next hat, put it on your head and say, okay, now I'm going to think about it with my emotional self, right? Now I'm going to think about it with my logic. Now I'm going to think about it with the data and really get into that, because creativity as a medium is questionable now, right? I mean, could we train an AI to do what is in the background here? I don't know if you saw any of the profile pictures that I posted. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing if you give your picture to an AI and say, I want you to create all sorts of different iterations of me as superheroes and generals of armies. And I mean, they can just do it. And it's amazing, high definition, printable work of art. Or is it? I think that's the question too. There's a philosophical question of, is that art? But to your point, creativity, creative thinking is where it's at.
I like that you shortened the name of the show, Derrick, the sauce, because the sauce is the stuff you put on.
Right.
The stuff.
Yeah, it goes on top.
And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the stuff that you put on this thing called working, business, everyday life. This is the sauce, right? It's all about, you got to have the steak, right? Everybody loves the steak.
Yeah, sure.
But to me, I don't know. I've always been a sauce guy.
Yeah. Well, you can take a really shitty piece of meat and put the right sauce on it, and guess what?
There you go, baby.
This was great, Andrew. We'll get some cutting on this, and we'll see what we can turn this into. But make sure you like and follow. I mean, of course, we want you to do that. We don't really do much on social media as much as we should. We need to start doing more of that. You probably find us more on LinkedIn than anywhere else, but we'll make sure to get this content out there, share it. And listen, I think come to a secret sauce. And one of the things about secret sauce, I think why it grows is because of referrals, like where you can actually, you're there and you're like, you know what, my friend, she owns this company. She'd be a great person to be here for this. And then bring those people as a guest and work them into the community as well. Andrew, thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. And we'll keep this, keep it rolling. And until next time.
The sauce is the key, we whipping it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up.